What up, everybody? We've got another Tight 10 for you today. Last episode, we covered the NFC depth charts, everything out of preseason, all the latest news and notes. And today, we get to do the AFC. And the AFC, very interestingly, has had a lot of injuries and different things that are impacting since I did the NFC one. I think most of the injuries ended up happening on the AFC side. So I'm glad I waited a couple of days to let the news hit so that we could go over the impacts and what's going to happen. I'm going to start you guys off with the big one with Jaden Higgins being out for the season with the torn ACL and what that means for the Texans overall, their offense, what it's going to do. Um, and if there's anybody that could step into that role and take everything on. So, looking at the depth chart, we can start with the receivers since that's the biggest impact that we just saw. I do think this is a big impact for the tight ends as well. So this entire offseason, Nick Caley and D'Amico Ryans, they've been somewhat talking up their tight end room, and then even the reporters, the beat writers, have been talking up the tight end room. They invested a second round pick in Marlon Klein. They added Foster Moreau. Brevin Jordan's back from injury. Cade Stover's back. All of these Cade Stover and Brevin Jordan were injured last year at some point. And then they added a couple more guys, and there's been a lot of chatter about Foster Moreau being a really good blocker for them. Marlon Klein being a second round pick, obviously high investment. Usually those guys end up being starters at some point. So what I think is going to end up transpiring is they were going to lean into 12 and 13 personnel, two tight ends or three tight ends with one receiver or two receivers on the field. And I think they're going to do that a lot more this year. So because they have less receiving depth now without Jaden Higgins on the team, now we're talking about, hey, who is going to step into that role? Well, let's put more tight ends on the field instead of just trying to figure out ways to take that on. Maybe we can rotate these receivers between Jalen Noel, Xavier Hutchinson, and Tank Dell once Tank Dell is healthy, and see what we end up getting. Now, I do think that this team is going to try to add a receiver. I think they could end up going for. I've mentioned Brandon Cooks as a name. He was on the team a couple of years ago, probably I think it was 4 years ago. D'Amico Ryans wasn't the coach, but Nick Caserio was the GM. So you could easily see something like that happen where there's just some relationship in play there. Obviously, speculation. DeAndre Hopkins, while he's doing assistant coach work right now, he is also still not retired. Has openly said that he'd be open to playing. So, history with the team and the organization, there could always be a chance at that. A lot of other random names like Josh Reynolds that could just factor in. And I think that the talent level of what they have now, I like Jalen Noel, but the team has continually talked about him as a slot receiver. I just don't think that they're going to end up putting him on the outside. Okay. We see this with players a lot. And sometimes it takes time for them to ascend to that level where they can reliably put them on the outside. He has not had practice time really this entire off season because he's been dealing with different injuries. And while they just brought him back in, there's 3 weeks. It does take time to be able to play on the outside, to learn a new position, to gain the trust in that role. And while he will have the opportunity to do such a thing, because there's really nobody else that's out there, I can easily see it be a rotation between him, Xavier Hutchinson, and Tank Dell. And Tank Dell is trending towards maybe not even being ready for week 1. We don't know how things will transpire for him. I think he's still risky, even though a spot is clearly open. I think he's risky. I would maybe take a shot in redraft leagues, but in best ball leagues, I'm still not really taking chances on Tank Dell until I hear more positivity. He's been missing practice lately, and my biggest concern with Tank Dell was, okay, great, you're out there, you're doing non-contact, you come into contact, you're doing more aggressive things. How is that load feeling on that knee? And we've seen him miss practices now, so it is hard to continually load that knee. Speaking of somebody who's had ACL surgery, meniscus surgery, etc., from playing football. Um, I think that this is something that um, could still prevent him, and I think the team is still in a situation where they're just evaluating like, do we think we're going to get anything out of this guy this year? I think they're definitely going to add somebody because there's still risk to Tank Dell. So now you're basically saying like the guys that we trust are Nico, Jalen Noel, and Xavier Hutchinson. There's only three guys that we truly trust. Then you have a vet and Justin Watson who you can throw out there. He can run some deep routes. Um, but that's only four deep without knowing what you're getting from Tank Dell. I think that they'll probably add someone reliable to make that. It could be a trade. It could be for Kayshon Boutte, um, but we don't know. So I think a veteran free agent addition here in the next couple of days is probably the way they end up going. And I just don't think this wide receiver too, especially in redraft, is going to be valuable at all. I think what it does is it props up Dalton Schultz. He'll be on the field a ton. Really good, strong, kind of like tight end that you can rely on who's going to get you 700 plus yards. And in certain weeks, he'll do a lot. And then obviously Nico he was already going to see a ton of targets. So now there's just a ton of targets right at him. All right, let's see. Questions from the chat on this specific topic. Someone said Kayshon Boutte, so I addressed that. He's obviously on the trade on like he's available for trade. There's been a ton of chatter on that. I don't necessarily know that they want to make a trade. Like that's the problem. And the most recent articles that I've read, it doesn't seem like they were interested in doing something like that in the past. But things change and these teams have to make adjustments to make things work. I don't know. I mean, it's definitely possible. Dalton Schultz season, I agree with that. I think that Dalton Schultz is going to be the number 2 target in this offense based off of all this stuff when he's on the field. Does this injury move Nico and ADP much? I think it'll naturally move his ADP up, but I actually don't really like this for him because he was going to get what he was going to get regardless. Like he is a bona fide alpha receiver. This lowers the ceiling of the offense because I think that Jaden Higgins was set to make a big impact this season. I'm actually really unhappy because I was leaning on him a little bit, but yeah, I don't think that this is something that's going to elevate Nico Collins, his potential for the season. I think what it does is still raises ADP, but not something that I'm like very excited about necessarily because this offense won't be in my opinion, be as good because of this. Any other questions on the Texans from the chat? Feel free to throw them in. I can also catch up on that after when I move on to the next team. So let's go to the next team. We'll just go with the AFC South in general. The Colts had an addition as well, which is another reason why I'm glad that I waited to do this AFC version. I waited on purpose. I wanted there to be enough like time in between so people could catch up on the NFC version. And I also wanted enough time in between with all the injuries to see what ends up happening. And so, yeah, we're at this point where now we can talk about the Keenan Allen addition to this Colts team. Another question from the chat about Kayshon Boutte to the Texans. Yeah, I think they're live to do it. Do I think it's likely to happen? I think it's hard to make NFL trades happen, but we know that Kayshon Boutte's available. We know that there's a need here. There's definitely other teams that need a guy like Kayshon Boutte too. But I think it's definitely possible. So I'm still taking shots on Kayshon Boutte late in drafts because I just think that there's just a lot of ways that things work out for him, whether that's with the Patriots or whether it's with some other team. So, all right, that's going to be the last time I talk about Kayshon Boutte on this episode. People that come into the chat, we can address that. You can go back and listen and address that. And I will make comments about that as people ask questions. Okay, so now talking about the Colts. So the addition of Keenan Allen, everything that I heard before the addition of Keenan Allen, which I was very certain was going to happen, because of all the reporting and all the linkages to Shane Steichen, um, everything that I've read is that he's going to play a more specialist role for this team, which means like third downs, clear pass situations, clear 11 personnel situations. And I'm not taking down Josh Downs' route share. Now, do I think that when the three of the receivers are out on the field between Alec Pierce, Keenan Allen, and Josh Downs, when I think they're all on the field together, do I think that Josh Downs' target share is probably going down? Yes. And I think this team is going to do a ton of 12 personnel still because they like to do that. They showed that in the past with Mo Alley Cox and Tyler Warren, and even Drew Ogletree, Will Mallory. Like they feel confident in their tight end room behind Tyler Warren. Um, so what I did in my projections is move down Josh Downs in terms of targets per route run, but only like a very small percentage tick down in route share. And I already had that kind of baked in to my assumptions because, and I still had him ranked really high because I think that his talent, I talked about this with Matt Harmon on his podcast. His talent is like a hidden version of Zay Flowers. He's really good. He can do it all on the field. We just haven't been able to see him in a position to do it all. And obviously, he doesn't have the quarterback like Lamar out there to highlight and accentuate all the stuff. But I still think he's going to probably get 1,000 yards this season. Now, median projections would never lean towards that because there's so many reasons why he wouldn't get it. But if he stays healthy, I think that he'll definitely get 1,000 yards this season. I'm pretty bullish on Josh Downs. I think he's going to keep falling in drafts. And as he continues to fall, I said this in other places, give him a week from now. So today is August 19th. August 26th, let's say he's in the 90s or maybe hundreds. I doubt he'll fall that far. I'm in. I've been drafting him this entire time. There's so many injuries at receiver in this like pocket, and we keep getting more information about like, hey, Brian Thomas might not play all the time, and we'll talk about him soon too because we're covering the AFC and their division. And I just keep like figuring out like, hey, I'm just gonna keep taking these guys that I think are gonna do really well this season over those players. Um, yeah. So that's my Josh Downs spiel for today. Keenan Allen, obviously a late round dart throw. If Alec Pierce isn't out there, he can obviously have some good weeks. If Alec Pierce is there, I don't expect him to run like a full route share, probably like 50, 60% in games that Alec Pierce is there, maybe even less sometimes, just depending on what the situation is. So he's a good like last round dart throw right now, or late dart throw in like best ball drafts. He's probably a fine redraft pick too, as a late round pick in case Alec Pierce is out for a long time. And then we just see him take on this underneath role and PPR scam his way to value on certain weeks. But outside of that, not truly interested in him long term this season. Alec Pierce, we haven't gotten much of an update. We saw videos of him maybe a week ago, kind of like doing some rehab work. He's not at practice yet. The team continually says like 1 or 2 weeks away. Adam Schefter talked about him yesterday on his podcast and said, hey, I really do think that he'll be fine. But, he does also agree that it's just been the same chatter about him being fine for quite some time. So I'm still skeptical that he'll be fine for week 1. We could easily get a report today that says he is. He's falling really far now where I think he's a good pick. There's drafts that I've seen him fall into the hundreds, and it's hard to find guys that are going to do a lot on the field in the hundreds and have some, obviously like spiky weeks like Alec Pierce does. And let's just say that everything does end up fine, and we're just all overreacting, and they do expand his route tree to do more underneath stuff eventually, which I don't think is likely given the Keenan Allen thing, but we can't like fully rule it out. There's so many ways that it could work out for him. There's obviously ways where it doesn't work out, but when it doesn't work out, now you're taking him as your wide receiver 4 or 5 instead of 3. and so you don't necessarily need to put him in your lineup. So I'm okay with where his price is starting to fall at this moment in time. It's worth the risk because I don't think he's going to be out for season. We'll just talk about Daniel Jones for like 2 seconds. Daniel Jones has basically done everything in practice, and every single report from um, the local beat writers to nationals like Robert Mays yesterday have basically said you can't tell that he's injured. He's taking every first team rep. He still looks like he's running around, getting mobility outside the pocket, all sorts of stuff. So I'm pretty much playing this like, dude, this guy is fully going. And yeah, he has an increased risk of re-injury because it's an Achilles tear, and putting that much load this soon on is obviously possible. But I don't think there's any reason to believe that there would be anything different than what you saw on the field last year, other than obviously he was super efficient, and that efficiency can wane regardless of whether he was injured or not. So I think he's a good pick where he's going in best ball drafts. For redraft, you could take him. Like I'm usually not taking multiple quarterbacks in redraft in general because I just think that there's so many that you can like rotate and cycle through. Yesterday, did my FFPC main event draft, which is um, a big money league, and I ended up taking Purdy in like round 13 or 14, and then taking Kyler in like the next round, and just did that pair, a yin and yang situation where I feel safe with Purdy, even with a rotation at receiver and stuff. I feel pretty safe with him. And then you've got Kyler Murray, who's like an upside kind of like if he runs, if everything goes right for him, he could do a lot in fantasy. So I'm not really taking a shot on Daniel Jones in redraft, but in best ball, I think he's a really good pick. Jonathan Taylor, Seth McGowan. They had reports yesterday. There was like projections on what the roster might look like. DJ Giddens didn't make the 53-man roster. That would be huge for Seth McGowan. There's obviously running backs that are going to become available after roster cuts. I talked about Michael Carter being one of those today. Um, he could get added here. Last year, they added Amir Abdullah. Amir Abdullah seems more likely to actually make the Jags roster, which we'll talk about a little bit later, because of the LaQuint Allen injury. So he would have been a guy that would slot in here actually because he was there last year, but now he's probably going to stay on the Jags. So I do think that it's valuable in redraft leagues specifically, and even I guess in best ball too, though you're trying to avoid some zeros there, to take a chance at this backup running back because I've been fading Jonathan Taylor mainly because every single year of his career outside of last year, he has basically missed time um, for ankle injuries, and it's always been recurring on the same ankles. Uh, and then I also think like threading the needle. So he's going like RB5 in a lot or RB4 in a lot of situations. I think you have to thread a very strong needle when you're not a pass catching back in half PPR and PPR leagues. The needle you have to thread is be on an offense that is really efficient, which they were last year. But everything once Daniel Jones fell off and got injured, and then eventually, um, missed the rest of the season. There's no surprise that Jonathan Taylor's performance fell off too because the offense was no longer efficient, and without a lot of PPR value, uh, it makes him very risky. And Dwayne McFarland did research on this too. He and I had been chatting about it, but it's like you have to thread this needle of being in a super efficient, like good offense if you're a runner. Whereas if you're a guy like I don't know Ashton Jeanty, you don't because you're probably going to be a top three target runner on your team, and you're just going to get the ball a ton. So the volume from the receptions is going to be there for other guys. And I do have Gene T ranked above Jonathan Taylor. Again, the injury risk is also something that I think about. So I am like interested in Seth McGowan. I took him in my FFPC main event draft last night. Um, that's a redraft league, so I can drop him. But I do think that investing in the backup situation here is smart, given the fact that Jonathan Taylor has missed time over the years. All right, looking at the chat for questions. Yeah, so there's a question on any notes on who is likely to be the Colts RB2. Yeah, I think it's Seth McGowan or a veteran free agent that they may add. And now the veteran free agent pool is like getting thinner and thinner. Najee Harris was signed yesterday with the Giants. I think Antonio Gibson has been mentioned with the Colts in the past, but for now, Seth McGowan is the guy. A specialized role sounds like playing full-time role till Alec Pierce is 100% for Keenan. Yeah, that's exactly what I think too. So he'll play a lot if Alec Pierce is out, which is why I think like in a redraft league, if you need a guy like that you can slot in early in the season, especially if it's a deep league, like he'll probably do some PPR stuff. So I don't think it's a terrible last round pick or late round pick. Um, and then in best ball drafts, also a fine late round pick because there's still risk that Alec Pierce like sits for a couple of weeks or he gets re-injured or whatever. And then another chat question: Pierce has been 1 or 2 weeks away for 8 weeks. I agree. I think this has been such a weird situation. And Chris Ballard, like the quotes that came out of Chris Ballard, um, people have mentioned like, "Hey, this guy said that he's going to be back in a week or two," but then he also caveated it with like so many he had a lot of caveats to that and said like I don't know basically whether he's going to be ready for week one. So I think like we might be underrating some of those comments a little bit. It was good to see video of him actually doing something, but I haven't seen anything since then or heard anything since then. All right, if there's no more questions on the Colts, I'm going to move on to the next team, which I believe would be the Jags, which is always the most fun team to go through. Um, because we're covering that division. All right, now we've got the Jaguars. Okay, so there's multiple things here. We're gonna start with the running back room because the Jaguars are always a fun running back room to talk about. LaQuint Allen is injured, might miss a little bit of time to start the season. We don't know how long it's going to be necessarily, but it doesn't sound like it's a season-ending injury by any means. So what that does is open up an opportunity for someone to play on those third down, long down, and distance situations. And I think it's very uncertain what will end up happening there. There's a chance that it's Bashal Tutin. I doubt it would be Chris Rodriguez, and then there's also a chance it would be Amir Abdullah. This increases the odds that Amir Abdullah would join the would make the team, which I talked about on the Colts side because the Colts had him last year, kind of playing this third down, long down and distance role. Um, and he could easily just slot into that role instead of Bashal Tutin getting more work. The role hasn't been fantasy friendly at all, but sometimes it's just, and I've seen a lot of people talk about this, but sometimes it's just nice to be on the field. And maybe the team decides to call different play calls because you don't have LeQuint in. And so you're like, you know what? We're not going to have the back do pass pro because back isn't like amazing at pass pro. So we're going to leak him out. And then there's just another option there. So we don't necessarily know what's going to end up happening there. Um, it's different when you have LeQuint or Dare Agumbawale in or Hunter Lipke for the Cowboys or whatever. Like that's like a pass pro guy. And we can't say for certain that when they have Bashal Tutin on the field that it would be that. And I'm not trying to be pro Bashal Tutin. I'm just saying like there's a chance that it's different. Um, but just talking about the running back room in general, Grant Udinsky talked about the uh, running back room yesterday, basically called it a committee. Bashal Tutin talked about it yesterday, basically called it a committee of people that are going to take on Travis Achan's role. We're not going to know anything about this running back room until week one. And even then, what happens week one isn't something that I believe will transpire for the full season. So, um, the hard thing about Bashal Tutin is that you're drafting him in a spot where you probably want to consider him a starter for your team in week one. And I still think he has league winning capability because this team is going to be a good offense. They do have a hard schedule to start the season, but I do think this team is going to be a good offense regardless. The problem with all of that is that I think that you're going to be in a spot where week one, maybe he gets like 10 touches. And 10 touches for a guy that you're spending a fifth round pick or fourth round pick, depending on where you're drafting, is not good enough. It's not good enough to be your RB2 in a lot of situations, especially if he's not going to get goal line stuff, which it sounds like they're leaning into Chris Rodriguez for short yardage stuff right now. And then, we don't know what his PPR scam role will be or not, if he's going to get like 2 receptions, 3 receptions, or if for some reason LaQuint Allen is out week one, if that takes him up another reception or so. So I guess my thought here is I am backtracking a little bit on Bashal Tutin, only because I think a lot of people will take him in situations that aren't going to be something that they're going to be able to rely on him, and you need to have the proper build in a redraft league with Bashal Tutin. In best ball, doesn't matter. Like you just take a bunch of running backs, and then eventually, like he'll come on and do stuff. I do think that Bashal Tutin will end up getting a bigger role as the season goes on because I still think that he's very talented, as opposed to Chris Rodriguez, who I think you get a little bit more than what's expected, and that's okay. Um, Tutin has the game breaking ability. He looks very good in zone blocking situations, and that's the reason why I like to invest in him. But you're going to need another guy to slot into that RB2 slot in your redraft leagues. So the way that I like to play a Tutin thing is in round one, I took a running back, so I feel good about my RB1. Maybe in round two, I took a running back as well, so I feel good about my RB2. Or I take RB1 in round one or two, and then I take Tutin as my quote unquote RB2, but I don't start him week one. I take a guy like Ramondre later, who I feel more confident in his role to start the season at the very least, or Rico Dowdle or Jalen Warren, guys that I think are going to be playing. J.K. Dobbins, another one that I think is like a good one to slot in instead of Bashal Tutin to start the season. And you just build out a room that way where Bashal Tutin doesn't have to be a guy that you start week one. You start somebody else, and then you can slot him in as he what I believe will be earned more. Chris Rodriguez, on the other hand, again, like he'll be there's definitely places where he would hit. He's going in round, I believe, like pick 133, so that's what, like round 11 or 12. So he's going to pay off his ADP if he remains in this like committee type of situation. Do I think he could be a 15 carry per game back? Yeah, if Bashal Tutin gets injured, they could easily lean into that. I consider it unlikely if Bashal Tutin is healthy. And then like there's still a situation where for some reason they lean into like, Jamari Taylor or Amir Abdullah or LaQuint Allen and just kind of like diversify amongst that because they would just want two different looks, like someone that's a little bit more explosive and then someone that's more of a like, bruiser like Chris Rodriguez is. So like a 13 round ADP, like he can definitely the odds are that he'll probably do better than that this season. But are you really winning anything if he brings back 9th round value? Probably not. The max that I could see him bringing back is like a 6th round value. And even then, that's not like too significant based off of other players that go after him. Like I would rather have, and my ranks reflect this, I would rather have Marshawn Lloyd in a redraft league than Chris Rodriguez because I don't know what I'm going to put in Chris Rodriguez. I know that I'm not going to put in Marshawn Lloyd. And then if something happens to Josh Jacobs, I'm going to be able to put in Marshawn Lloyd. So that's the way that I play redraft is like, I don't want guys that I think are going to end up being roster cloggers. I want guys with high potential to be able to slot in, but I need to build my team in a way where I don't have to rely on Marshawn Lloyd to do anything for a while. All right, now let's talk about the receiver room. Just talking about the receiver room for a second. So there was a report yesterday from Mike DiRico, who covers the Jaguars for ESPN, and he was talking about how, like Brian Thomas and Travis Hunter haven't been on the field. They haven't really been sharing the field very often. So it seems like Travis Hunter, our lads has it as Travis Hunter as the backup, but the real depth chart that was released last week had Travis Hunter as the backup to Brian Thomas, ex receiver. So what that means to me is like whenever Travis Hunter is on the field, it seems like they want to have Brian Thomas come off the field instead of Parker Washington or Jacoby Myers. The article also said that Parker Washington, it seems unlikely that they want to take him off the field at all. Huge for him. That means his route share will be very high. And that was one of the big concerns for a lot of people when when I was touting Parker Washington, whether he would come off the field. Then you get back to the 12 and 13 personnel comments that he had where he said, like, I was told I was going to be on the field for those. It also sounds like Jacoby Myers will be on the field a decent amount as well. I don't like to play this team through Jacoby Myers. I think in a best ball format, totally fine. But Jacoby Myers to me is also, from a receiver perspective, for redraft, is more of a roster clogging type of receiver because I see three guys that could end up being higher target earners than him. Um, could he end up giving me wide receiver 3 value? Yes. Can he get me by in a pinch? Yes. I tend to, like, at a certain point in drafts, I tend to take bigger swings, and so that's why I don't really have Jacoby Myers ranked super high for me. But there's people that like him, and want to lean into like 800 yards on the season, which is fine, but that is not me. So Parker Washington is obviously the way that I prefer to play this because one, everything this summer has been about Parker Washington. Two, I think that he is their de facto wide receiver one on a team that's going to score a lot of points this season. Maybe not early in the season because of their schedule, but throughout the season, I think he'll have big weeks. Um, in the tight end room, they're going to do a little bit more, a small amount more, 12 and 13 personnel this season, which obviously takes a Brian Thomas or Jacoby Myers off the field or Parker Washington, but it sounds like they want to keep him on the field. That means Brenton Strange will be on the field a ton this season. I think he's a solid pick. He's probably not going to break fantasy for you. I think he's a really good, he's a good football player. Usually I like tight ends that have the chance to be a top 2 target earner or like are an injury away from being in that situation. Guys that go near him that I like more are now Juwan Johnson, because I believe Juwan Johnson is going to be a top 2 target on this New Orleans Saints team after the Tyson injury. So I don't take Brenton Strange a ton, but he is a guy that is in a good offense where, you could probably waiver wire him and throw him in your lineup. Take him in best ball because he's in a good offense, and I feel like he's going to be out there a ton. The others, I don't think are interesting for this season. Even if an injury happened, Brenton Strange, I don't think Koziol would end up having enough playing time because they would want someone that can still do inline stuff to be out there. Titans. Let's talk Titans. Yeah, so with the Titans, we saw their preseason game. Wandale and Carnell Tate were out there a ton. Calvin Ridley played a little bit at the beginning and then sat for the rest of the game. I think Ridley's another trade candidate. It's very possible that they end up trying to move him. Sure, he could land on the Texans. Why not? It sounds like Alec Imanor is having a really strong camp. The team seems to like him a lot, especially in that X receiver role. Once Calvin Ridley went out, it was Alec Imanor that stepped in for him. He is the more natural, like, outside receiver than Tamir DK. DK listed here as a backup slot, which is exactly what I expect him to be. More of a gadgety type of player. I'm not interested in DK at all. I don't really think that he provides much. I didn't see anything on film where I was like, hey, this guy took a step forward in terms of route running. He wasn't a great route runner before. I don't think that that's going to happen anymore for him anyway. So Carnell Tate and Wandale Robinson, we saw how the offense operated. Cam Ward was very late on a lot of his throws. He allowed that pressure to get to him. This offensive line is not very good in general. And the film turned out to be exactly what I thought it would be, where he needs to check down to Wandale Robinson. And I think Wandale Robinson will lead this team in targets and receptions and probably receiving yards too, if both he and Carnell Tate are healthy. I still think that Wandale has high enough upside to be valuable. We just talked about Jacoby Myers, and I don't think of him as Jacoby Myers because we literally just saw a season where Wandale was this like top 15 receiver. He was giving you wide receiver 1 weeks down the stretch. I don't see that happening with Jacoby Myers in any situation because they just have too many options. Whereas this team basically has 2 options, and you could argue that he might be the better option between the 2, or that he'll at least be the focal point option of the 2. I really like Carnell Tate's talent. I just don't think it's a good fit for this season. What I saw on tape was him still running routes that take time to develop that I just don't think are going to have enough time to develop as this team as Cam Ward is going to be under pressure. Now, Cam Ward does do a lot of extending of plays, is willing to take risks, throw across his body, all sorts of stuff. That stuff will happen. We'll see Carnell Tate benefit from it from time to time. I don't think it'll be predictable, and that's the hard part about fantasy is you want guys that you feel like, hey, I'm going to put this guy in and he's going to score a ton of points, especially at the draft capital you have to give up for Carnell Tate. It's just a really crummy point of the draft where they're at like right after like Roma Dunze and Parker Washington, it falls off to Carnell Tate, Brian Thomas Jr., um, and guys like that, and Marvin Harrison Jr., who I just like don't want to really take in, especially in a redraft league. If I had one draft, I wouldn't take any of them. In best ball, I'm mixing them in because they could still hit in the right week. But yeah, I can't stress enough that Carnell Tate is not somebody that I'm taking this year. If you're in a dynasty league, I think you let others, um, you know, he's probably worth trading for later in the season or in this off season. I would consider him a target because then we'll know more about how this team is going to trend, whether they keep investing in Cam Ward, whether they get some more offensive linemen, all sorts of stuff like that. They need a no line in order to protect Cam Ward in order for this to all work out for him. Wandale, I think, is the way that I prefer to play it. I wanted to take him in my big money league draft last night, but he got taken before I had a chance. Running back room, we saw a rotation between Tony Pollard and Tajay Spears. And then we saw Nick Singleton come on after them. I talked about Michael Carter. Michael Carter is somebody who is going to be released probably from this team and is just live to ruin some other random backfield. He's not like a great football player, but he's like one of those guys that like, all right, well, we thought that Marshawn Lloyd was going to get this big role, but yeah, they just want to supplement him with Michael Carter a little bit. Or Seth McGowan, you know what? We're going to just supplement you with Michael Carter or something like that too. So anyway, back to the split between these two. I do think that it's going to be some sort of split. I think it'll be like 60-40 Tony Pollard, with Tajay getting a lot more like receiving work, though Tony Pollard can do receiving stuff too. And then Tony Pollard getting the, inside the 5 type of touches. I don't like taking shots on Tajay Spears because this goes back to my strategy of how I play things. One, I'm not fully confident that he would end up taking on like a big workload given the investment in Nick Singleton and all of the strong reports of what he has done. So it's very possible that if Tony Pollard gets injured, Nick Singleton takes on a bigger role. Two, I don't like investing in bad offenses when I'm talking about a guy that, yeah, sure. Can I slot him in randomly in a week and just hope for like 10 points? Sure. Can I slot him in if Tony Pollard gets hurt and hope for like even 15 points? Sure. Am I going to be in a situation where I feel like Tajay Spears is going to win my league for me because the way that this offense is, because I think there's risk of Nick Singleton taking on a role if a Tony Pollard got hurt? Yeah, I just don't think that's the case. So I tend to lean away from Tajay Spears types, Dylan Sampson being another that's like that. I know we've seen it from Tajay in the past. I just think that we haven't seen like an RB3 that they like in the past, and Singleton has flashed enough to where I think that they would want to get him some work, especially this being a new coaching staff that actually was the people that invested in him. Now I could be wrong, so take your own preconceived notions, like whatever you feel, but that's my opinion. And then Gunnar Helm, we saw him split a little bit more than we would like with Daniel Bellinger. They're going to do some 12 personnel this year with 2 tight ends on the field, but he is going to split at tight end a little bit more than we would like. I also think this team is going to need a tight end to stay in to block sometimes. And so that's just going to take away from the route share that you see. Typically, you want tight ends to be above a 70%. And I just don't think we're going to get there with Gunnar Helm. Fine for best ball, not somebody I'm really that interested in redraft leagues, unless it's tight end premium. And even then, I'm not like, I don't know what the full upside is. But I will say, if an injury happened to Wandale or Carnell Tate, there's always a chance that he ends up being a top 2 target earner, and that's something that we like in fantasy. So that's another reason to maybe invest in him. Not possible for Singleton to dust Pollard by the end of the season. I think it's very possible for that to happen. This team Obviously, Tony Pollard may not. I would doubt that he's on the team next year. The whole staff isn't the staff that invested in him. So there's so many ways that this doesn't end up working out for Tony Pollard by some point in the season. The only thing that I keep thinking through is what do you get when you win on Nick Singleton? You get a guy that's probably a first down and second down grinder on a team that's not going to score a bunch of points. And I just don't. I like other bets instead of him because of that aspect. Because I still think they would have some back involved for the pass down stuff either to protect Cam Ward or just because they want someone else that's more of a meaningful pass catcher in the game. Um, yeah, I don't find the running back room valuable in general, and so that's why I've just leaned away from Nick Singleton. Is it very possible that he ends up getting a role? Yes. Is it possible that I'm wrong? Yes. But it's a different way than the way that I play fantasy typically. Now for Dynasty, I think he's interesting for sure. Moving on to the Bills. Okay. DJ Moore. So just in general, the receiver room played receiver roulette, but I think that could just be a situation where they're just trying to get some looks with all the different receivers. They probably wanted to get reps for Josh Palmer because he's in the battle with Keon Coleman for wide receiver 3. They probably wanted to see what these other guys looked like out there as well. They did 12 personnel. They did 13 personnel. That's part of their normal offensive packages. I expect DJ Moore to be out there a ton. His route share wasn't super high, but it would have been higher if he didn't get injured because he probably would have been out there on the next play. And so we got to take some of that with a grain of salt. It seems like he's healthy, came back to practice. So I'm not worried about the ankle as much as I was before. I think there's ways where this breaks super right for him. If he gets 1,000 yards, am I surprised? No. If he got 1,300 yards, I'd be super surprised. But he is a guy that I think is on like that wide receiver 3, wide receiver 2 borderline. I am not in the camp that thinks that he's like fully cooked and that he's just not a good football player anymore. I think he is still a solid football player. Is he an elite receiver? No. Is he a like good to above average receiver, which I think is like, above the Khalil Shakir line for sure. I think he is still that. Like his separation metrics on certain types of routes last year were still good. Like we're talking like top 10 percentile on like certain types of routes, like the dig route, which is something that they'll ask him to do. So I'm okay with taking shots on him. He's not going to be a big hit player in my mind. He's more of like a pretty solid floor that can have some good weeks for you throughout the season where you're going to probably keep him in your lineup and rotate him between wide receiver 2 and 3 on your team from time to time. So I think he's a fine pick. I have other guys rated above him, Parker Washington, Christian Watson, because I think they have higher upside than he does this season. But I could see why you would take a guy like him. And I think that he's a better pick than Jameson Williams because I think Jameson Williams needs injuries for him to be even the top 2 target earner on his team. And yeah, I'm good with DJ Moore. Khalil Shakir rotated again. We expect that. He's more so just going to play in the slot. So whenever they go in 12 and 13 personnel, he'll probably come off the field. Though they did seem to expand his route tree a little bit. He did some more downfield stuff. He's one of the lowest like A-door and A-dot players, average depth of route, average depth of target players over the past couple of seasons, like in a record low way. So it's good to see him working a little bit further down the field. He's not a player I target because I also think it's like a very low upside play. And at a certain point, you're looking beyond, projectable like 8 points a week type of players. Keon Coleman looked a little bit better, but he did suffer a bigger injury. He might be out for a while. So, I'm not playing this wide receiver 3, like even wide receiver 3 roulette situation for this team. Don't care who it is at the moment. I'm just not doing it. So, I still think that Josh Palmer is probably a better player than Keon Coleman too. They're probably going to split. Skylar Bell's injured. He can come on at some point. Tyrell Shavers might come back later in the season and factor in too. It's just going to be a little bit of a rotation. At tight end, we saw Dalton Kincaid rotate, but he's also coming off the PCL. I think it's PCL injury, and coming back from all of that. And he's still been wearing a sleeve and stuff too at some of the practices. So I think I don't know if they're still going to rotate him a ton, or if they could rotate him a ton at the beginning of the season and then play him more later as he continues to show that he's got a full bill of health. We don't know, but in preseason it was a little bit of rotation again. Uh, I think that we just need to keep paying attention, see what we think. At a certain cut point for tight end, I do think he's valuable because there's always the upside. And at tight end, if you're not getting a guy that can be a top 5 guy, then you're just kind of rotating dudes anyway. And so with Dalton Kincaid, he goes in a range where I'm like, if he got the route share, he would be in that top 5 conversation at tight end. And so I want to take shots on that. I think it's unlikely that he ends up being the high route share guy, but he's going next to Travis Kelce, and Travis Kelce is going to project for more yards than Dalton Kincaid this year because he's going to be on the field all the time and get 800 yards like he always does. But I know what I'm getting with Kelce. I don't know what I'm getting with Dalton Kincaid, and I have the potential of getting a huge season out of Kincaid. I'd rather have Kincaid in that situation. The problem is I still like Isaiah Likely that goes behind him, even though he was rotating his first week as well. I kind of talked about that in my last pod. Go check that out. And then Juwan Johnson's another interesting one that goes behind him that I think is underrated at the moment as well. Dallas Goedert being another one that is also underrated. So I think fine to take shots on Dalton Kincaid. If I had one draft, I'm not really doing it, but yeah. And then James Cook, interesting. We saw him contribute in the pass game quite a bit. He was out there a ton. They obviously had injuries and to Ty Johnson, and we haven't gotten a full update there yet on Ty Johnson, though I think he's doing some conditioning type of work. So that to me means that he's probably not out forever. Yeah, I think he's going to get more involved in the pass game. I took him at 6th overall in my big money draft above Christian McCaffrey yesterday, mainly because sometimes in this redraft leagues, I think that you can lose your league by taking a guy like Christian McCaffrey. It depends on what the risk reward is. And I felt at 6 that I feel close enough. Like Christian McCaffrey, if he plays all season, is going to beat James Cook. But if he doesn't, which I think there's always a decent likelihood that Christian McCaffrey misses time. I feel like James Cook is going to give me a solid, really good season, and I can still win my league and win tournaments with James Cook, as opposed to Christian McCaffrey. Really good offense, low risk on that. Very much could be more involved in the pass game. We saw it even in the preseason game that he was running more routes. Obviously, Ty Johnson wasn't there. I'm very excited about James Cook. I have him ranked as my RB4 behind Christian McCaffrey, but again, in this big money redraft league, I wanted to hinge myself to James Cook instead of Christian McCaffrey in that situation. And I think Ray Davis is your early down back that would replace James Cook, so he's interesting as a dart throw as well in case James Cook got injured. And they'll probably keep this fullback on the roster, which is going to hinder probably Dalton Kincaid and other receivers as they lean into that personnel package. I might go a little quicker because I'm taking long on some of these teams. The Dolphins, interesting. I'll cover the receivers quickly. Chris Bell off NFI, which means he's ready to practice. There are some reports that he might end up playing in the last preseason game, 50-50 shot on that. If he does, that's huge for his progress, because the only thing that we're worried about is, is he able to get back on the field? And it seems like the team is willing to put him out there, get some practice reps. He's not doing team drills yet, as of today. But, I mean, if we get him in preseason at all, that's a huge win. And they have I think it was a week 6 bye. Might be week 5. I can't remember. And after that bye week, I expect them to ramp him up significantly. In best ball drafts, I am taking him a lot at the end of drafts right now because I do think that he could be their top receiver, and also think that he's been less drafted and will be less drafted because there's just inherent risk with him. But if he is their best receiver, that would be huge. I liked the film that I saw on Malik Willis. I thought he looked solid. They're not going to throw the ball a ton, but there's going to be big play opportunities with play action. Um, Chris Bell is going to slot in as like a underneath and deep target for them, where they're going to try to get him in space and break tackles. That's like part of his game. Caleb Douglas will probably play more of a vertical threat type of receiver, which is going to be like, think of Alec Pierce as like his max that he could do. Now, if Chris Bell wasn't in around, like, yeah, I think Caleb Douglas could do more than that, maybe. But I don't think that. I think with Chris Bell around, they're going to want to work him into some of those more like intermediate and underneath things. Malik Washington is going to do the short game stuff, PPR scam. Um, I'm not that interested in him because I think that eventually you could see Kevin Coleman come in. There was good reports out of him coming from OTAs. Maybe they want to get a look at him. I don't know. Take shots. This is like late picks on Malik Washington, Caleb Douglas, and Chris Bell. Chris Bell's my favorite. You could basically get him in the last round of anything. So I'd be taking shots on all those guys. We did see at tight end a really big rotation. They did do a lot of 12 personnel, so 2 tight ends on the field. There was a rotation with Will. I'm going to mess this up, but Kekmarek and Greg Dulcich. And, you know, a lot of people are writing like, hey, this wasn't good for Greg Dulcich. I still think that there's a chance. That Greg Dulcich is going to play a lot, and that he was coming off of practice where he was in non-contact injury, dressed out in non-contact injury things, and that they just wanted to get him on the field and weren't necessarily getting him on the field in his full workload situation. Devon Achane played pretty much. I think he played every snap with the starters, so he's going to be a bell cow. He's probably going later than he should. People are worried about the offense. You could basically consider him and Ashton Jeanty in somewhat similar situations. I think Jeanty's in a probably slightly better offense. And then, you also have the coach, Kubiak, who can get a lot more potentially out of him. But there's like literally zero risk of Achane being on the field in any situation, whereas there's been some strong reports on Mike Washington, and maybe they will spell Jeanty a little bit more. I think Achane's just going to get like crazy workload volume. I don't have it ranked where I have Achane above Jeanty because I still think like it's probably likely that Jeanty ends up getting like everything. But I do think that he's probably better to take than, and I have him ranked above Jonathan Taylor in a lot of places too. So depends on your league format. In a PPR league, he's going to absolutely smash. Moving on from that team, let's go to the Patriots. The Patriots didn't play most of their starters, but we got to see Kyle Williams. He looked good out there. It says a lot that the team actually played him, though, because that means that he wasn't like, highly sought after, like, hey, this guy's going to play a lot type of player. Hunter Henry didn't play. Romeo Doubs didn't play. AJ Brown didn't play. So it sounds like Demario Douglas is their slot receiver right now. I think they'll rotate wide receiver 3 quite a bit, which they did last year. Between the guys that are going to be on the roster, I don't know who that's going to be because they're probably going to get rid of one guy. It's probably going to be Kayshon Boutte. But they could rotate between Douglas, Mac Hollins, Kyle Williams, and Efton Chisholm. I think those are the guys that'll probably be on the team. And, 2 of those guys are outside receivers and 2 of those guys are slot receivers. So whenever the other ones are on the field, you'll see probably Romeo Doubs go into the slot. And then when Demario Douglas and Efton Chisholm are on the field, you'll see them in the slot instead. You may even see AJ Brown take the slot sometimes, especially in motion or something like that. So we may not get as much Romeo Doubs in the slot as we thought we were going to get initially. Practice reports have been strong on Romeo Doubs. It sounds like he is, going to be that he has done a lot better after getting more reps with Drake May, which I think is huge. He's learning a different role. He's not playing the same role that he did in Green Bay. He's not playing the X receiver. That's AJ Brown, and then Dubs is playing the Z or the slot, depending on who's in the game. So it's good to hear that he's gaining that confidence, that things are looking up for him. I think he's a solid pick. It's hard to get guys that you think are going to play a ton late, that are in a really good offense, and that's what he's in. So it's worth the risk. His separation metrics have always been pretty positive. Um, just to see like what ends up happening, and you could drop him in a redraft league or in best ball, he's going to stick on your roster, and you're pretty confident he's going to play a lot. I don't want to take shots on anybody else. Kayshon Boutte, I would take a shot on just on the possibility that he's on a different team. And then his role is spiky sometimes, where he gets the deep like touchdowns and stuff too. If for some reason like he stays on the team. Hunter Henry didn't play. Eli Raridan was basically the tight end 2, splitting with Tanner Arkin, who's more of a blocker. Eli Raridan being more of a receiver. Though Eli Raridan in his own right is a solid blocker as well, based on his college tape. And yeah, I mean, for Dynasty, he's a good bet. I know they just re-signed, did an extension for Hunter Henry, but Hunter Henry has never had a very strong bill of health. He was healthy last year, but in the past, he's always been injured. Eli Raridan sounds like he's getting rave reviews out of camp. I think it's worth taking a shot on him in Dynasty. In redraft, I obviously leave him on the waiver wire. If something happens, be ready to spend money, because I think that he could step into a nice role for this team eventually. It's just good to hear that he's doing well. Ramondre is most likely the starting running back. He's gotten every single first rep with the first team. Travion has gotten more positive reviews in terms of pass pro lately, which means he could take on a role there eventually. I do think this team will probably lean into Ramondre if it's a 60-40 split. It's a good offense. I have Ramondre ranked above Travion Henderson. I think we're kind of wish casting Travion into a bigger role. But obviously, injuries can happen. If Travion gets injured, that's going to make Ramondre a smash. If Ramondre gets injured, that makes Travion a smash. So you can't like super fade either of these two guys, because I think that there's just situations where both of them are guys that you need at some point this season. And we saw it. We saw Travion go crazy when Ramondre was out, or when he was limited from injury. And we saw when Travion was less of a factor, we saw Ramondre have some big weeks as well. The Jets, another interesting team coming out of training camp. We saw situations with them as well that were a little bit surprising. Right now, A.D. Mitchell, wide receiver 2, in 2 wide receiver sets. They're going to probably lean into A.D. Mitchell right now. Mid-season, I anticipate that being a mix between him and Omar Cooper. Garrett Wilson is so dynamic in that he can do everything. He could do an underneath role, an intermediate role, a deep role. And so that allows, when you go in a 2 wide receiver set, for you to be dynamic in who you want to put out there between Omar Cooper, who may do more like underneath stuff, versus A.D. Mitchell, who's going to do more deep stuff. And then Garrett Wilson can play off of one of those 2 guys. So I feel pretty good. One, I felt awesome about Garrett Wilson coming out of this. I think he's a guy that I like to take in a lot of drafts. I've drafted a lot of him because I think that this offense could be slightly more elevated with Geno Smith this season. This offensive line isn't like terrible, quote unquote. It's a lot better than what they had with the Raiders. So it was good to see that. And then yeah, we've got the elephant in the room, which is Isaiah Williams. I talked about this on a different podcast, but I don't know. Like, this is me speculating, but Aaron Glenn comes from this like Dan Campbell, earn it, and then also having history with working with Ben Johnson. And then some of the coaches on coaches staff are still from the Lions. And I think that there's just a little bit of, you have to earn it. Even if you're a first round or late first round kind of pick situation for these guys. We saw what Ben Johnson did with Luther Burden, keeping Olamide Zaccheaus on the field last year for a little bit longer than we wanted to, until Luther Burden showed up and was able to do more dynamic things for the team. Um, I think that's probably similar to what ends up happening with Omar Cooper. I won't be surprised if Isaiah Williams is like the slot receiver in in three wide receiver sets to start the season. But I don't expect that to. I don't. One, I think it'll be somewhat of a rotation. Two, I don't expect that to continue for super long into the season. So I still really like, especially as Omar Cooper is dropping, I really like taking shots on him because one, it's very possible that he still wins this slot receiver role. I still don't think he'll be valuable to start the season, regardless, because I think they'll do a rotation there, or that they'll go two tight ends a little bit more and take him off the field. But I think by at some point this season, we're going to see a lot of Omar Cooper Jr., even if it's late. So I think he's a guy that I want to, especially as he's falling, I want to take shots on. At tight end, I keep saying this about Sadiq, but they have to make choices. The team has to make choices on whether they go 12 personnel or 11 personnel, three wide receivers or two tight ends on the field. They spent a huge draft capital on Kenyon Sadiq, but he also hasn't practiced at all, basically. And it's going to take him some time to ramp up. So early season, you basically should be projecting to not get anything out of this guy. Is he going to mix in? Yeah, of course he's going to mix in. He's not as much of an inline blocking tight end as much as Mason Taylor can be. Mason Taylor is also a decent route runner. He's not a really, really good football player, but he's a solid football player, Mason Taylor. So I just think he's going to do enough to keep Kenyon Sadiq off the field, especially early season. Eventually, can we see Kenyon Sadiq as an inline tight end this season? Sure. It's possible they get him feeling comfortable playing in that kind of role. He's falling a ton in drafts, so yeah, I think it's worth taking shots on him as your tight end 3 or so in situations. But I wouldn't be surprised if he never earns the target share, or sorry, the route share that we want him to get to this season, just given the fact that they have enough adequate play in front of him. They could just opt to say, hey, we want Omar Cooper on the field instead of him sometimes as the third wide receiver, or A.D. Mitchell, or Isaiah Williams. And so it's just there's this weird situation. I think at some point, especially if the coaching staff gets fired, they're going to want to play all these dudes anyway. So we'll see what happens. Breece Hall got injured, groin injury. It seems like he's going to be back before the beginning of part of the season. They expect him to be out 2 to 3 weeks. He got basically 3.5 weeks till the season. He's going to fall a little bit. I would buy that fall. He had basically all the snaps with the first team in the preseason game. That's what we wanted to see. I think he's going to be a workhorse, not a bell cow this season. They'll still mix in Braylon Allen and Isaiah Davis when they're healthy. But Breece Hall is one of those running backs that can break fantasy because of his skill set. I really like taking shots on him, especially as after that running back cluster in round 2 goes away. Breece Hall is my next running back above Jeremiah Love. Ravens. All right, looking at the Ravens, they sat a lot of their starters as well. So we didn't get to see Lamar. We didn't get to see Mark Andrews. Even Durham Smythe sat. Derrick Henry, Justice Hill, Rashad Bateman, Zay Flowers. Those guys did not play. Who did play was Jacoby Lane and Devontae Walker. I expect Jacoby Lane to be the wide receiver 3 and 3 wide receiver sets, which they're going to run a lot of this year because they don't really feel confident in their second, third tight ends just yet. It's possible that changes over time. And Jacoby Lane is going to likely be in those 3 wide receiver sets. So I think he's a good later pick because there's always a chance that he is the second target in this offense eventually, above Rashad Bateman, above Mark Andrews. Mark Andrews is struggling at training camp with separation and with drops, things that have the drops especially has hindered him over time in his career, especially in the playoffs against the Bills a couple years ago. But with Jacoby Lane, again, I like him as a stack with Lamar. I like him as just a dart throw in general. He's probably a good dynasty asset. He had a really good preseason game. He was the first wide receiver on the field with Devontae Walker and came off the field with Devontae Walker. Obviously, Walker could rotate in too, but I think Walker fits more of a Rashad Bateman profile where it's like, hey, we want this guy to run deep routes. So I think if Rashad Bateman got hurt, it would be more likely that Devontae Walker plays into that role. Elijah Surratt, more of a like underneath intermediate type of target, possession-ish type of receiver. So I think he and Jacoby Lane are somewhat fighting for a similar type of role. And so, but there are ways that Jacoby Lane and Elijah Surratt make it onto the field this season together, especially if Rashad Bateman gets injured, and then maybe they just like Surratt over Devontae Walker in some way. Lane is definitely the one to target. I'm not very interested in Devontae Walker because I think his role when he's on the field is not going to be very fantasy friendly anyway. And then Surratt's another one that I'm just kind of keeping my eye on for now. I talked about this a little bit with Mark Andrews. He's been struggling in training camp. We saw Matt Hibner with a nice couple plays in the preseason. I think to start the season, you'll see Mark Andrews out there a ton. But if they decide, hey, he's not even doing very much, maybe you'll see a little bit more rotation with Hibner working in there, with Durham Smythe being a blocking tight end, and just enough stuff to get him off the field where he's just like not valuable in fantasy. Is there a chance that he's really good this season? Yeah, there's a chance. Do I think it's going to happen? No. I'd say the odds of him crushing fantasy is lower than Isaiah Likely, lower than Dalton Kincaid, lower than Juwan Johnson even. So I'm not that interested in Mark Andrews this season. I think his route share is what you're chasing, and there's other arbitrage versions of that, like Dalton Schultz, who we talked about earlier, who is also potentially the number 2 target on his team now that Jaden Higgins is out. So, yeah, I think arbitrage Mark Andrews is Dalton Schultz right now. Behind Derrick Henry, we know that he's going to be like the workhorse running down guy, Justice Hill playing in passing downs. Adam Randall seems like he's going to be the running back 3 on this team. If an injury happened to Derrick Henry, is there a chance that they sign somebody or trade for somebody? Yeah, I think it's very likely that they would do that, actually, because I wouldn't say very likely. I'd say that there's a possibility that it ends up happening because this is a team that's trying to win a Super Bowl this season, right? Those are their aspirations. So if you're going out there with Adam Randall, that's maybe not the situation you want to play out for yourself. Instead, maybe you trade for a Tyrone Tracy. Maybe you trade for somebody else out there to make sure that you have something. So I think there's some fragility to Adam Randall, but right now it seems like he would probably be the Derrick Henry backup if Derrick Henry got hurt as like the early down rusher. I'm not taking stabs on him in best ball. I think he's a fine redraft pick at the moment because you can drop him. The Bengals were also interesting coming out of training camp. Also, if you guys have questions, feel free to ask questions in the chat. We haven't gotten some for a few teams here now, but if you do, I'm happy to answer anything as we go through this. With the Bengals, it was interesting. We did see a lot of under center. We saw that Colby Young rotated in for T. Higgins maybe like 1 or 2 times. I think it was 1 time, which I don't think will happen much in general. So I'm not freaking out about that. Like, these are their 2 guys. We saw them go 2 tight end, which I think is valuable for these 2 guys as well. They're already going to get huge target shares, and now you add a guy like Drew Sample on the field or even Eric All and take away an Andre Yoshivas. Yeah, that's helpful to these guys to get more targets. Then I don't think that Yoshivas is worth drafting in any situation, because I think if T. Higgins or Jamar Chase goes down, you might see Colby Young slot in there. It seems like Andre Yoshivas is more so going to be their slot receiver. So, like, if one of those guys went down, I think Colby Young would probably be the guy that I would take a flyer on at some in some situation. Eric All didn't play in the preseason game, but it seems like he's going to be a factor. And there's going to be a rotation between him, Gesicki, and Drew Sample. I'm not really interested in any of them. If one were to randomly crush fantasy, it would probably be Eric All. But I can't see them putting him into an every down role, given how big his injury history has been. So I'm not really taking shots on Eric Hall. Uh, the running back situation. So I do think that Todd Brooks will stay on this roster, be the RB3. Samaje Perine is probably the real RB2 in handcuff. Like, even if Chase Brown got hurt, would you see Todd Brooks get in there? I think it's Samaje Perine. I don't know, guys. Like, I haven't drafted him at all, but it seems like they would just lean into him. So I think that he could be like worth something because this is a good offense. We've seen them put him and rush him between the tackles. He obviously has pass down chops. So could he do like a ugly version of Chase Brown work? Yeah, I think he could. Um, it's ugly, but I actually think that he is the real like handcuff on this team. I don't know what they would bring in or if they would try to bring anything in if Chase Brown went down. But they did split a little bit. But Chase Brown got a little bit more than what we normally see. It's small sample size, so you got to take it with a grain of salt. They did do under center rushing, which is supposed to help with rushing explosiveness, and it does based off of Chase Brown's history. So that's exciting. They're going to do play action too, which will keep defenders on their toes. I am very high on Chase Brown. I moved him down a little bit, but I'm still above ADP on him. I thought that maybe we'd see like an every down guy, and we got like a workhorse role instead of bell cow. So I'm I'm cautiously optimistic on Chase Brown this season. If you're at the back half of the first round, you know, if you took him after James Cook and Christian McCaffrey, do I think that's crazy? No. I feel like that might be exactly where I would take him. I have him after Gene T. I could see a reason for Kenneth Walker, but yeah, I think Chase Brown is in a pretty decently safe situation where you're not going to lose your league, and you also have tremendous upside when you take him. I believe this is the last team. We're going to talk about the Steelers. Questions in the chat. So, actually, I screwed myself up, guys. I'm sorry. I exited the wrong screen. We'll go back to our lads depth chart. I'm going to go back here on this. I skipped the Browns, so I'm going to go to the Browns. And I saw a question in the chat about the Browns with Harold Fannin and KCC. So I'm going to add that to stage and get back into it. Any thought on Fannin with KCC hype this weekend? Is that an overreaction? Where are you on Browns or Brown Walker Hampton grouping? Okay, I'll answer this question first. I'm going to talk about the Fannin and KCC hype. So where are you on Chase Brown versus Kenneth Walker versus Omarion Hampton grouping with the Chargers O-line injuries? I don't think Tyler Biadasz is like a incredible center. I think he's like average to maybe slightly below average. So I don't think this injury is as big of a deal, other than the fact that you are missing out on more offensive line communication continuity, which is what a center really kind of is like a glue person for. And then you also don't have like very many centers just like available to add. It sounds like they're going to put Jake Slaughter, try him out at center on their team. So there's a possibility that that ends up working for them. But I do think that I'm not as concerned as maybe others would be about the offensive line right now. I think we just kind of wait out and see how it is. Hampton's still a guy that I'm like a little bit lower on in general, but like I see so many ways that he like crushes this season, and it's so tough to discern the difference between all of those running backs in the same cluster. The only thing that I want to say about it is that there's a higher probability that Hampton busts compared to a lot of the other ones. And so, especially in redraft, in best ball, it's different. Like, take your shots, especially portfolio. In redraft, I really think that the first couple rounds, you're trying not to lose your draft. And because you're not like, they're all going to project for like 18 points or like 16 to 18 points at the end of the day. And so the first like 3 rounds, you kind of just eat your vegetables a little bit, like reduce risk as much as possible in those first couple of rounds, and then you start taking shots a little bit later on. Um, and Omarion Hampton, where he's going right now, is the higher risk player than pretty much any of the other running backs because he's in a situation where you're not sure what his workload is going to be. I still think it'll be a good workload. Still think the offense is going to be good, but I don't know for certain. Whereas I'm pretty sure with guys like James Cook and Chase Brown, Ashton Jeanty, Saquon, Jonathan Taylor, Kenneth Walker, that I know that these guys are going to be like pretty much featured role players, workhorse at the very least, sometimes bell cow type of players. So I have Chase Brown and Kenneth Walker above Hampton, like very, very clearly in my ranks. I will talk about this tight end premium question, and then I'm going to get back into the Browns depth chart, which everyone is always excited about the Browns, of course. Rank Laporta, Kraft, Fannin, Pitts. So I have Fannin above all of them. And then I have Pitts, and then I have Kraft, and then I have Laporta. And I'll talk about Fannin here in a second so that I don't, ruin all this for anybody. And I'll talk about it in conjunction with this. So Fannin to me is a guy that at the end of the day, when I look up at the end of the season, is there a way that he is the tight end one? There are so many reasons to believe the answer is yes. Even with situations where the quarterback situation is absolutely garbage, we have seen a lot of tight ends have incredible fantasy seasons, including Harold Fannin last season, where at the end of the season he was with Shador. They were barely throwing the ball, and he did incredible. Like he was scoring 20 points. Now you could say they didn't have receivers, and they added 2 receivers this season. One, I don't think that Denzel Boston is going to be taking very much away from Harold Fannin because they're not going to really operate in the same part of the field. 2, you had KCC, who is more of a gadgety, like underneath-ish type of guy, though I think he can do a lot more than just that. So yeah, is he going to get some targets that are maybe going to take away from Harold Fannin? Yes. But we have seen Harold Fannin on an NFL field do a lot, and what he did was so promising. He is, in my opinion, the best yak tight end in the NFL, above Tucker Kraft and George Kittle already as a rookie. He was. The metrics coming out of college, we all know them. Incredible player. Then he comes to the NFL. All he does is do awesome things again. Not a great blocker, but the preseason game, they had him on the field basically the entire time. So, and then the coaches compared him to Brock Bowers and that they want to use him like that. He's not the same player as Brock Bowers. He operates in a different way, but really good football player. I think that he's the guy that you want to invest in this offense more than anybody else. KCC and him go close to each other in like half PPR leagues where there's not tight end premium. In tight end premium, he is my number one target because I think you can get a really strong team and then take him and be really happy about it. I actually wanted that to happen last night, and then Kyle Pitts was my backup option. I didn't get Pitts. And then I had the option between Tucker Kraft and George Kittle, and I took George Kittle. I'd rather have Kittle than Kraft this season as well. Kittle is one of those guys that I'm targeting a ton as well. Laporta, to me, is in a situation where, like, some games he will hit, some games he won't, because their offense is going to be, like, Amon-Ra, no question, number one, and then who number 2 is will vary by game. And I don't like that for a tight end. I would prefer to have a guy that I'm certain is top 2 pretty much every single game, which I feel strongly about for Harold Fannin. I do not feel that way, and I feel decently strongly about that for Pitts, though you could say Bijan is number 2 sometimes as well, but a lot of times Pitts will be in that realm as well. And they don't really have any other options, to be quite honest, out on the field. And then with Kraft, I'm not certain either because I think that they're going to play less rotation at receiver this season. So is it Watson? Is it Reed? I don't think it'll be Golden above Kraft. And then I'm still a little concerned coming off the injury and the ramp that I'm going to see there. And with Kittle, I think he's easily top two, um, pretty much every single game when he plays and when he's healthy. And I think he's going to be healthy to start the season. I think he's going to be there week one. So that was my long tight end spiel. Now getting back to the receiving room for the Browns. Yeah, KCC is going to play a gadgety slot role to start the season. He probably won't get a full route share until at some point they decide that Jerry Jeudy no longer needs to be on the team. Denzel Boston will probably play like almost in every snap role. He's unique in that he's probably their only X wide receiver that they're going to keep on the roster because Cedric Tillman's not going to make the team most likely. Tylan Wallace isn't really an X receiver. Isaiah Bond isn't. KCC and Jerry Jeudy are not as well. You could sub Jeudy in sometimes, but yeah, Boston's going to play an every down role for this team. I don't think he's a great football player, but I do think that you should take shots on him because we see players sometimes we have misevaluations and he could just do a lot. He's going to do a lot of like downfield stuff, and I don't really want that from fantasy. And I also know that Deshaun Watson to start the season is going to be the quarterback most likely, and he doesn't really push the ball downfield anymore. I'm not interested in Jerry Jeudy. KCC is the way that I like to play this if I'm not going with Harold Bannon because I think he is clearly very talented. They're going to funnel targets to him in designed ways. And I think by like week 4 or 5, he will be a full-time receiver, slotting into that Z role and then going into the slot whenever they go three wide receiver sets, which I expect a lot because they don't really have tight end depth behind Harold Bannon. I know that it's an AFC show, but have you heard anything new on Burden? I remember you said the offense will run through him. I'm really high on Loveland. Can you see both of them smashing? I've covered this before, but with Colston Loveland, the issue with him. So I think it's higher likelihood now that Burden's coming off of an injury that Loveland ends up being more of a focal point than Burden. So I'm like right now I'm like mixed between those two, unsure which one I would take. In one draft today, I took Loveland above Burden. But other times I've taken Burden above Loveland. We saw some clips of Burden running at the preseason game, like doing straight line stuff. So I think that he's going to be fine. Everything that I've read and heard says that he's going to be fine for week 1. So I feel decent about that. But there's always re-injury risk. So take that with a grain of salt. But yeah, Loveland's a great football player. The way that they both smash is if Caleb Williams is able to throw for like 4,300-ish yards. And I just don't think that they want to operate that way. But it would require Caleb Williams to become a more accurate passer, which is possible. So I won't fully rule it out, but I don't think it's likely that both of them smash. Chase Brown or Ashton Gene T, I'm a bit concerned about Mike Washington causing a split, I guess. Yeah, I have Gene T ranked above. I'm not really that concerned about Mike Washington. I think that he'll get some spell stuff, but Gene T is just special, man. And I think he's gonna be the second target on this team behind Brock Bowers. So he'll be out there a ton, catching a lot of passes. If you're a PPR league, I think it's a no-brainer. If you're not in a PPR league, you know what? It is still a no-brainer. I think you got to go Gene T in this situation. I had it flipped, but now I think Brown will still come off the field enough to where Gene T makes more sense in this situation. Moving on to the running back situation for the Browns. Judkins is going to play pretty much in the early down grinder role. He did get a little bit more pass catching than we saw last season in the preseason. So there's some upside with him. Obviously, this is not going to be a really strong offense. Dylan Sampson is basically slotted for a pass catching role. I am not drafting a Dylan Sampson. Very, very similar to a Justice Hill role, but in a really bad offense. Whereas Raheem Sanders seems like he is the handcuff to Quinshon Judkins based off of everything that I've heard. So, and I'm not taking shots on Raheem Sanders either because there's probably some weird split between them, and who knows, they could add somebody too. Steelers, there was an update like not too long ago, and it was during this show, so I'm going to read it on the Steelers receivers. Let's see. It seems like there's man. uh, Michael Pittman and DK Metcalf are not in danger of missing week one. Great to hear. I think Pittman is the one that will probably get more targets this season and more receptions. Metcalf will have more of like the downfield stuff. Uh, and the downfield stuff with Aaron Rodgers is questionably valuable. Though I think that Rodgers still has the arm strength to do it. So it's not about his arm; it's about whether he likes to get the ball out quick and feels comfortable. The offensive line looks a little bit better this season, so I think that we could see him hold the ball a little bit longer. And again, if you have Darnell Washington and you decide to leave him out there to help pass block, like that's a cheat code as well. So I think that there's chances that DK has big weeks. He scores really well in my receiver score metric, but this is one that I'm like questioning the model on a little bit more, and I haven't like taken too many shots on DK Metcalf, but he's going in a range where like I think you can take the risk at the moment. Like he's going in the mid 70s, and there's just like a ton of receivers that aren't very good in that spot. I like taking downs and read above him, but I think that like on a median projection, you're going to see DK Metcalf outproduce those guys this season. So, but if things break right for those guys, I think their break right situation is way higher than DK Metcalf's. And then yeah, Pittman, I think he's very live to have more yards than DK Metcalf this year. The tight end situation, I don't have too much clarity. It sounds like Pat Freiermuth is going to be more involved in the offense this season. I just don't know if that means he's going to play all the pass downs or run all the routes or what that is. So I don't have clarity on that. I wish I did. And then Jalen Warren and Rico Dowdle, it's going to be a split, and it might be a like real 50-50 split. And it might also be a 50-50 split where it's drive by drive instead of like pass versus run. Though I think it's going to be early down Rico Dowdle and Jalen Warren with the like more pass catching role this season. Though I think they can like Jalen Warren's obviously a better pass catcher, but I think that Rico's fine enough to where they could do a drive by drive situation. I actually in a full PPR league had the was on the clock and I had the option to take either, and I took Rico Dowdle because I think there's a greater chance where Rico Dowdle does a lot more work than if Jalen Warren does a lot more work. Like 20 touch game, Rico Dowdle. And so I would rather take a chance on that happening than Jalen Warren. That's just my the way that I play it. It was my RB3, RB4 kind of situation. Caleb Johnson, unlikely to make the team at the moment. Like I would say like 40% chance of making the team. So he's kind of interesting from like hey, if this guy just lands with the right roster, is there a way that he like works himself into favor with some other team? Like let's say the Cowboys want him as RB2 because they don't like Jaden Blue and they don't like Phil Maffa as much. Is that possible? Sure, very possible. So something to keep an eye on. Last division, let's work through the Broncos. Jalen Waddle's back at practice. He went through full practice yesterday, so I'm not concerned about him. Still a huge target of mine. He has moved up a ton. Early in the offseason when I wrote about him in May and said like he is like my flag plant, he was going in the 5th round, early 5th, and now he's like late 3rd. So, but I still have him ranked above that because I do think he is like good enough to where he should be kind of in this cluster with like Zay Flowers, Ladd, all those type of dudes, and that's kind of where he goes now. But I'm still taking him above some of those guys right now. Courtland Sutton, late in the preseason game. It seems like they played most of their guys other than J.K. Dobbins and Bo Nix. Waddle didn't play, but he was dealing with an injury. I don't think he would have played anyway. But that means he's probably clearly their wide receiver 2 right now. Pat Bryant came on like kind of like after that situation. But Pat Bryant I still think is live to take Cortland Sutton's job at some point this season. Doesn't mean it'll happen, but you always want to take a chance on guys that have that possibility. But we don't know exactly how many pass yards are available in this offense, right? Because Bo Nix, hasn't thrown for 4,000 yards yet, but he definitely could do it this season. He was at like three. He was kind of in that same like Caleb Williams ish kind of situation where it was like 3,900. I think I gotta check. Bo Nix stats. Anyway, we could see, he was at 39-31 last season and 37-75 the year before. We could see him ascend, adding a Jalen Waddle as a force multiplier. So I think that there's a chance that he ascends a little bit more and gets closer to that 4,200 yard situation, especially with Jalen Waddle. And then if Pat Bryant takes a step forward, there's room for this guy to ascend a little bit more. But what I will say is, Pat Bryant's a guy that I'm taking shots on late because there's a chance that he ends up with a bigger role this season than most people probably think. And then behind them, you've got Marvin Mims and Troy Franklin. I don't think that Lil Jordan Humphrey will make the team. He'll probably be a practice squad guy for this team. They'll probably go 5 wide receivers. And I'm not interested in Franklin or Mims at the moment. Moving on to the tight end situation. I do think that Evan Ingram is going to play more than he did in previous seasons. That doesn't mean he's going to be super fantasy relevant, but I think he's an okay dart throw at the end of best ball drafts specifically, because last year he got 400 yards. I think he could get like 500 or 600 yards this season if things break right. And it's hard to find tight ends at the end of drafts right now that you're like, hey, this guy's going to play a decent amount. And I think he's going to play more than he did last year, given the Davis Webb connection and just what like Bo Nix has talked about, that they're lining him up in line a little bit more this season, hoping for him to contribute a little bit in the run game. Is that a good thing for him in the run game in general? Probably not. But at the same time, if he's going to play in line, that's going to help quite a bit for him. So I think he is live to get closer to 600 yards this season than last season. J.K. Dobbins, R.J. Harvey, Jonah Coleman. We obviously saw great things out of Jonah Coleman in this preseason game. I can't say that I'm not like super excited about him, but at the same time, I do think that this team is going to lean into J.K. Dobbins early in the season. In games where they're winning, which this is a good football team. They should be winning games. They have good defense. I think you're going to get J.K. Dobbins up to 15 rushes in those games. And so I've still taken J.K. Dobbins. He is a really, really good running back. Like I'm talking, if we're just talking about rushing skills, he is probably in the top 7 or so running backs. If you put him in Saquon's situation last season, he would probably have done better than Saquon because he's a better vision guy. Now, would he have done as good as Saquon 2 years ago? No, because he doesn't have the same burst and explosiveness as Saquon does still. But in terms of operating in an offense, he is so good with his vision and his cuts. And at the first and second levels, he doesn't have the same burst he did coming out of college. So he's not downfield explosive as much as he used to be. But I think he's a really good football player. So I think he's still going to take on his dominant role. Now, he's never been a clean bill of health, and that's where you get really excited about Jonah Coleman. And there's always a chance that they decide, hey, let's give Jonah Coleman a few more touches as the season goes on. So early season, 15 touches for J.K. Dobbins, I think, is super live. By midseason, is there a way that turns into 12 and that Jonah Coleman gets a few more and then Jonah Coleman steals a little bit of R.J. Harvey reception stuff too? Yes. But he's going to need, in my opinion, he's going to need an injury for him to be fantasy relevant this season. But if that injury does happen, it could be huge. So that's a good reason to take him as a handcuff. R.J. Harvey's in his own pass catching role. Third down, somewhat Kamara-ish, but not necessarily. So I think that we may be forgetting that, he doesn't have the in between the tackles ability, but he is an explosive player. So is there a chance, he showed that he could take a workload last year. Is there a chance that for some reason J.K. Dobbins goes down and they still put R.J. Harvey out there to do a lot more than what we expect rather than Jonah Coleman, there's a chance. So I'm not going to fully write that off, but I haven't really seen myself taking Harvey that much because I think he might be locked into this role. So TLDR, J.K. Dobbins, decent target, someone that you can pair with Bashal Tutin while Tutin is like getting ramped up or potentially taking on more eventually. And Jonah Coleman, nice little handcuff to potentially take too. Chiefs had some interesting things going on as well. I'm going to look at the chat, actually. There might be some questions. Yeah. What's Najee Harris fair ADP in best ball? I think it's just a late round like dart throw. I'm not taking him higher than round 17. 17 and 18 I kind of both treat as like who knows. But higher than that, I'm not really that interested. Gene T is a beast. I might get him as my RB2 in my keeper home league. Yeah, he's a beast. And thanks. I appreciate it. Okay. The Chiefs, interesting situation with them. All of their receivers are basically dealing with some sort of injury. Xavier Worthy with his shoulder, so that's probably less concerning. Rashee Rice still coming back off the knee, and Tyquan Thornton with his hamstring injury that happened yesterday. Expected to be fine, but hamstrings can linger. He's a speed player, and that just happens sometimes. So that brings us to Cyrus Allen, who looked really good in his preseason game. There's a lot of smart people out there, Matt Harmon being one of them, even Brett Whitefield, another one. Talk about film guys who are really into Cyrus Allen. He didn't do much in college, which is why he doesn't pop from an analytics perspective. He wasn't even invited to the combine, but film that he put on tape and the hype that's around him and his separation ability, I think he's a good player. I think he could be a good player. Sorry. Currently, it sounds like he has wide receiver 4 locked down above Jalen Royals. The way that they played it in preseason, those two guys were out there because the other top 3 were not playing at all. Those two guys were the first 2 guys out there, and then they had Andrew Armstrong rotating in and Nico Remigio. I expect Cyrus Allen to be wide receiver 4, and then you're talking about these other guys being banged up already. All it takes is one for him to then be on the field a lot more, and then if he makes plays, he gets on the field more, and then you're connected to Patrick Mahomes, who we know is a top quarterback ever. So I think he's worth taking flyers on. Is he going to project well? No. But there's so many ways that this works out for him right now. There's also ways where it doesn't. They could sign Brandon Cooks, or let's say Justin Watson gets thrown off the Texans and they bring him back to the situation. There's chances that all that stuff happens, but in a redraft format, like anything after the 10th round is probably droppable on your team. So just take a chance. I think it's worth taking a chance right now because he could just be better than all the other dudes. I'm scared on Rashee Rice, but I'm still taking him in best ball drafts because there's always the chance that he's good. He's also falling. I'm not taking Worthy in any draft. And Tyquan Thornton is interesting in best ball formats only for me late. To the tight end situation, Kelsey is kind of like I can pretty much just throw in 700 to 800 yards for him and pretty much lock that in for the season. If that's exciting to you, you take him. I take him in stacks. I'm not taking him outside of game stacks or team stacks. The running back rotation was interesting. Kenneth Walker didn't play, or sorry, he did play. He got 1 snap. But behind him was Emmett Johnson and Brashard Smith. I don't expect Brashard Smith to be anything more than a pass-catching kind of type of back. Emmett Johnson is a guy who had really strong film, good metrics, a little bit slower, but that doesn't always matter. Matt Waldman, running back guru, has him as his RB2 in this class right after Jeremiah Love. He looked solid out there, and now he's getting the second reps in practice with the first team above Brashard Smith and Mari DiMercado. I think he's the handcuff, and I'm starting to lean in heavily to taking him as the handcuff to Kenneth Walker, who has proven to never really truly be healthy. I do like Kenneth Walker a lot, but I'm also still scared of his ankle and the injuries that he's had over time. So I think Emmett Johnson is a must handcuff right now. given the concerns about Kenneth Walker ever being healthy full time. Raiders, another interesting situation. Jack Besh flashed a little bit in preseason. Dante Thornton's been injured. Malik Benson's been rotating in with the first team. I don't think any of these receivers are really that valuable. If you want to take darts, just in case, like, if for some reason they're so good that they end up outplaying a Naylor or Trey Tucker, and then they're just good and they're on the field a lot and they happen to take a lot of work, I think that's fine as like a very last round pick. In best ball, I'm not taking shots on Besh or Malik Benson because I think they're going to be operating primarily at a two tight end, two wide receiver sets. And that means that this Besh and Malik Benson and Dante Thornton role is just not going to be on the field in a lower pass volume offense. I also think whoever is on the field is probably target maybe 4 in the offense. I think Mayer's really good. He's a guy that I'm targeting late in drafts because I think he has value in, especially in best ball. He has like spike value because he'll be on the field a lot, and I think he's good. And I think he's their top 3 target earner when he's on the field. He's their top 3 target between him, Gene T, and Brock Bowers. But when he's off the field, that we just don't know what his route share is going to be. So that's the one thing that I worry about with him. But he's a good handcuff because Brock Bowers gets injured, you're going to see Michael Mayer be one of those tight ends that like has a lot of spikes and would be a top priority target off the waiver wire. Behind Gene T, we saw Mike Washington have probably the best play of the preseason. He's gotten a lot of training camp hype. He's also shown up in joint practices recently. He did really well against the Texans first team. I'm getting slightly scared about Gene T. I'm not I think Gene T is this incredible player. So I'm not gonna fade him at all because of this. But there is worlds where Mike Washington takes on, 5 touches a game. And each one of those touches just starts eating away from Ashton Gene T getting to this potential 400 touch season that he's capable of having this season. And it just ruins his absolute, hey, I just broke fantasy season. And instead he's a really good player season. But Gene T's still going to be great. And I think he's my RB6 in my projections. So I'm still taking a lot of Gene T. I'm just upping my concern a little bit in terms of smash fantasy altogether. Checking the chat. No questions. Moving forward. Last team, the Los Angeles Chargers. We saw Ladd McConkey, Trey Harris, and Quentin Johnston all be rested. There's an injury to Tyler Biadasz. I believe there's some other offensive line injuries as well, which I'm not as concerned about right now. Jake Slaughter is going to be that center. They drafted in the second round. So I think that's somewhat of a high upside situation because I don't think Biadasz is that good anyway. The rookie could be better than him eventually this season. Now, rookie offensive linemen struggle typically, but I don't think that Biadasz is anything crazy good anyway. We saw Aronde Gadsden play. We saw Keandre Lambert-Smith, Brennan Thompson, Darius Davis, etc. play. And then we saw Kamani Vidal play as well. The biggest thing for me is that they went a lot of 21-12 personnel, fullbacks, tight ends on the field. And what that means is we're going to see 1 and 2 wide receiver sets a lot. And then all 3 of these guys rested, I think it'll primarily be Ladd and Quentin Johnston. But there's always a chance that it's not Quentin Johnston all the time and that it's Trey Harris sometimes instead with a fullback and tight end on the field. So I'm a little scared on Quentin Johnston. I'm still leaning into Ladd being the guy that plays all the time because the way that Popper talked about him, the beat writer, was that they're going to put him in more of that Tyreek-ish type of he's the primary read. He's doing all the fun stuff. So I think Ladd could break fantasy this season for sure. So he's another like priority target of mine. It's like him and Waddle in that like range right after Zay Flowers that I'm like, I want one of these two on a lot, like almost all of my teams. Um, but I think there's risk to Quentin Johnston based off of like if they decide they want to put in Trey Harris, because Ladd is a 3-level threat. He can do things short, intermediate, yak stuff, and then also deep. Whereas Quentin Johnston is more, he's not a good deep threat, even though he's caught deep balls. He's dropped a lot too. And he's not really a good intermediate threat. He's more of a yak type of player. So he would be more of an underneath guy, potentially. Whereas Trey Harris is more of a deep threat. And so you could see them rotating those two guys based off what they want Ladd to do in the offense. And a tight end, I think we're not going to see Rondé Gadsden that much this season. We're probably going to see Kolar and David Njoku all joint practices, everything. I have heard very little on Gadsden. I think he's working on run blocking. They brought in these two tight ends because they want guys that can block on the field and that can also do other stuff, but mostly block. We've seen Mike McDaniel with Gesicki basically putting him in like a specialist role. Even with Darren Waller last year, specialist role. I don't know that we're going to see much out of Gadsden this season. It's very possible he barely plays. It's possible that he doesn't even suit up some weeks. We'll see. I'm not taking shots on him at all anymore. I've pretty much written him off. I'm not taking shots on any of these tight ends. Hampton rested, Keaton Mitchell rested. I still think Hampton is likely to be like the more every down player with some spelling by Keaton Mitchell. And then like Vidal is like the handcuff to Omarion Hampton. That's how I've been playing this. I think Vidal is a really good pick late in drafts. I don't like taking Keaton Mitchell. I think he goes too high right now. He was good in the 150s because it was like, all right, I'm getting like, that's where handcuffs go. And then you get the plus because he will probably be involved. But I don't think he's going to take on an every down role if Omarion Hampton gets injured. We've seen this archetype before. It doesn't happen very often where a guy like him does get the every down role. And so I'm leaning into probabilities on this. Vidal is likely to factor in if Omarion Hampton gets injured. And so I like taking shots on him at the end of drafts. You can basically get him at the end every time. And this is a good offense, potentially. So I want shots at that. All right. Any other chat questions? No other chat questions. All right. We're going to wrap this up. All right, guys. Thank you so much for paying attention to me and watching this show. Like, subscribe, share with friends. I know the friends that aren't in your leagues, please share it with them. For the cut up, I'm Zane Denani. Thanks.